Hello and welcome to Transform Tuesday. I'm Dave McCormick, VP of Product Management here at Alpha Software, and I am pleased to present Sarah Mitchell, our Head of Documentation. Today on Transform Tuesday, we are continuing our discussion of the Transform programming language, and we're going to get to a really interesting bit here today, local database access with SQLite. Now, it's a good thing that many of you have attended the last couple of courses because you're going to, or last couple of sessions, because we're going to tie together what you've learned in the last several classes into this one, especially things that have to do with arrays and objects and functions and so on. So there will be a little bit of review, but of course, if you have any questions, go ahead and type those questions into the questions box of the GoToWebinar control panel. Now, I don't think I'm sharing my screen yet, so let me go ahead and do that. And I just would like to confirm, Sarah, can you hear my voice and can you see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Yes and yes. Okay, cool. Awesome. So let's begin. So what is SQLite? Let's just start with what the what's and the whys. So SQLite is kind of two things, but it's a database that is actually been created, or a database system that was created using the C language. And it works as, or very similar to something like a MariaDB or a SQL Server or one of those other SQL type databases. The nice thing about it, though, is that its data structure is all confined into a single file. So it makes it really convenient if you need to pass around these databases from device to device. Now you could also, SQLite also has got a file format, and here's the thing actually here from the SQLite project page. SQLite is an open source project, and there is a commitment to actually not change the file format through the year 2050, which in programming terms is forever. So we don't actually use these C language libraries, as far as I know. Well, we may actually in Alpha Anywhere, but we don't use them in Transform. Instead, we implement the SQLite using a Cordova plugin. This is happening behind the scenes. You don't have to worry about it. But it's just good to know sort of how things work when we get into the code. So our system uses the SQLite file format, and it uses a Cordova plugin to create the database engine. So, okay, that's cool, that technology, but the practical upshot is, here's what you could do with it. You can use it to perform sort of several really useful things in your Transform forms. So for example, you could populate drop-down lists based on user choices. So for example, if a user had selected, say, a country, let's say they chose Canada, and then they chose a province, let's say they chose Ontario, it could then list all of the all of the cities and towns that you found in that province. You could also use it if you've got a really super long drop-down list that you want to use in multiple places or maybe across multiple forms. So instead of copying that long list, let's say it's a list of products or something like that, instead of copying those into each of your form designs, you could put that into a SQL database, look it up, and populate that list from that SQL database as you need it. The second one, possibly the most common, certainly one of the most useful, is the ability to do lookups. Now, this could be a barcode scan type of lookup or another kind of lookup. So in today's example, actually, I'm going to show you how you could enter in, say, a phone number and have it look up a customer's name, address, and other details, email, and fill in fields on your form just by entering in the phone number if they were found in the database. And last but not least is its ability to validate. Supposing that you only allowed entries from specific zip codes or from specific postal codes, you could have it look through a long list to make sure that what the user has entered is valid, either appears in a list or doesn't appear in a list. There's a bunch of reasons why you might want to use validation against a very large database list, also known as a cross-file validation. All right, so let's get started. Today is going to be pretty coding intensive, so hang on. The first thing I'd like to do, though, is just do a quick review of objects and arrays, because I want to talk about a specific type of array of objects called the queue list, which is a property of drop-down lists that you create in Alpha Transform. So let's imagine that we have got a form, and on that form we have just two fields. One field lets you choose mammal or reptile, as those are the only two choices, and the other one is a drop-down list that lets you choose a particular type of animal. Now let's say if you chose mammal, you only wanted your drop-down list to show mammals. If you chose reptile, obviously you'd only want to show reptiles. So let's take a look through the code on how that would work. First of all, you want to take a look at we are on the type field. So in other words, I've created a field in my form called type, and when you open up the editor for the type field, that's where I want this piece of TPL code to run. Now, the first thing I do is I set variable equal to an argument that's passed in whenever this is run, and that argument is contained in args1 here. The basic way you set a list control in Transform is you first take that argument value, which is right here. You then build an array of objects with the things that you want in the drop-down list, and then you set that argument value equal to that list. Now, this part really confused me. I'm used to, and probably there are people on the here who are much better programmers than I am and instantly grok this, but I always found it weird that if I set s equal to this argument thing, how come changing s actually ends up changing the argument, changing what's inside the list? Well, it does. And actually, I might call in Sarah to sort of explain that portion. After all, she does in fact have a degree in computer science. I do not. Sarah, are you there?
I am here. Yeah, so in this particular case, S args1, however you want to think about it, isn't a simple data type. It's an object. And to back things up a little bit, when you assign one value to a new variable, depending on the type of data you want to copy or assign it to that variable, it can be very expensive to make that copy. And so what some programming languages do is for things like objects and arrays, instead of copying that and making a brand new object in memory, it just copies the pointer to where that object is located. So what you end up with is two variables pointing to the same place in memory. So if you manipulate that variable in one location, it changes the other one. So that's what's happening here. And because of that, it's also why you see the list as it's being built here, why the object function is being called to create a new object for each value in that list. If you'd made a single object and then set the value and change it for each one, it's possible that it would just make every single entry in that list the same. So that's what's happening here. If it was a simple data type, like a number, doing something like s equals 1 and then saying t equals s and then changing the value of t, you would have two variables with two different values. But because it's an object, it behaves a little bit differently.
Awesome, thanks very much. All right, so that's the most confusing part. So if you made it through this far, and it seems like we haven't lost anyone yet, or they haven't dropped out at least, I think the rest of it should be pretty easy to follow. What we do is we build an array. We went over arrays, I think, in the very last class, and for each, or second to last class, and then for each object in the array, we call the object function, which creates an object which has got two properties in it. One is called text, and one is called value. And I set text to dog and value is equal to the Latin name for the dog. I do that for the next element in each one of these arrays. And at the end, I set the queue list. Okay, so that's how you set up a list control. So I just wanted to go over that. That's just review. We've covered that before because I now want to go into an example that uses SQLite to set up a list, a drop-down list. So here's a drop-down list where what we want to do is we've got a SQLite database, and in it there's a table called customers, and we want to have a drop-down list that has all of our customers in it. So here's the code for populating that list. We start out again with s equals args of 1 because at the end we're going to want to set s.queueList equal to an array of objects. So in here, we end up building that array, and we build that array by making a call to our local database. And we do that first by defining the SQL call that we're going to make. And this is a pretty simple one. Select contact name from customers. And then we execute that SQL command. And we create a variable here called SQL results equals. And then here's our built-in function, PhoneGap TF execute SQL. If you remember, PhoneGap and Cordova, they had a sort of interchangeable names for a while. And so that's sort of where that nomenclature came from. That actually calls that plugin that's built in. But this is all handled for you. All you have to do is pass in the name of the table, I'm sorry, the name of the database, and what the query is. So in this case, I have a table called customers, but I also have a database called customers. Keep in mind a database can have multiple tables in it. And I pass it the SQL string to tell it what kind of query it gets. Now, what I get back is I create a new array called data, right? And then what I do is I take a look and I do basically a for next. And I start at the 0 position in the array that I got back from the results set. And I set a variable called row equal to that results set. I build a new object called object, and I set a property object.value equal to row.contact name. Now this is an alternate way of setting a value inside an object, and then I of course I use the data I equals object to set the variable here, and at the end of it I end up with this data array being populated. Now what I've done here, obj.value equals row.contact name, is actually pretty similar to here, where I used the object command, but I assigned those attributes on the inside, text and value. Here, I've done the same thing with that value thing, but I've done it by using a pointer variable. So take a look at that syntax, make sure that you do understand that, because once you get that, I think you've probably got one of the hardest bits of TPL to understand. So anyway, once this is done, once it's executed, it fills up that list with SQLite data. All right, let's see. Do we have any questions so far? Not yet. Wonderful. So I'm going to go on to the next slide, and this is going to be the big example. All right. This is where we're going to do a fill-in. So what we're going to have happen is we're going to have a field on our form called phone. And when someone fields in or changes that value, what it's going to do is it's going to do a lookup to see if that phone number is found in our database. And if it is found in the database, it's going to set a bunch of additional fields with information found for that particular phone number. So it'll set the company, the address, the city, the postcode, and finally the country. So let's take a look here. Again, we're setting up a string with a select statement, select name, address, city, postcode, all this stuff, where phone equals, look at this question mark. What's that question mark all about? Well, the question mark means that there's going to be an argument. In other words, that's going to get replaced with something later on, okay? And what it's going to get replaced with will happen down here when I execute the results. So the fact that I have a question mark here now means that I have another parameter there. Let me show you what I mean. Let's go back to the previous example. Here I just said PhoneGap TF execute customers. I gave it the name and I gave it the name of the database and I gave it the SQL string it was supposed to execute, but no third parameter. But because my SQL string has got a question mark in it, there's now a third parameter for that argument. And if I wanted to say where phone number equals something and last name equals something and city equals something and use question marks for each one of those, I absolutely could. I just have to put in a comma for each one of those arguments here in the function call. Okay, now in the last example, I knew that I was going to get back data because I already knew that I had a customers table and that there were records in it. But here, I'm not 100% positive that the phone number that the user types in is actually going to match a record in my database. So the very first thing I'm going to do this time when I execute the PhoneGap TF execute is check to see how long the result set is, right? How many did I get back in that array? And if that's equal to 0, I'm going to return, which basically means I'm going to just end the script right here. So nothing else to do. Otherwise, we're going to assume that we did find something. And what we're going to do is we're going to take that first row of SQL results, and generally there will just be one row of SQL results, but that first row, remember they start at 0, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and go up from there. And I use that to select the row that I want, and then I just basically say row.name, row.address, city, state, postal country, and these all match up to the field names that I have in my SQLite database. Let me see if there's anything else tricky or interesting I want to show you here. I don't think so. Obviously, I knew the names of these because I set up the database ahead of time. So there's you do need to know how your data is structured. Okay, so that's sort of the big one. Now keep in mind, this phone number field could have been a barcode field. So if the barcode returns something that you could look up in the database, that's what you would do here. So a couple quick notes about SQLite in general and how it's implemented in Transform, and then I want to go on and show you a couple other things before we break. The first thing you should know is that yes, you can do things other than select statements. I believe you could do inserts, you could do deletes, you could do all kinds of stuff, but that's not going to be particularly useful because keep in mind that this SQL database is living as an on-device asset on the phone. Even if you update it locally, there's no way to get those changes back, or there's no really easy way to get those changes back up onto the server. So this really isn't a place for making updates. This is really used for doing lookups against data. I think that's actually the key point I wanted to make about this. Oh, no, the other thing is, of course, that you could get back multiple. If you had the same phone number matching multiple records, you could get back a result set that has more than one record in it. That's why we've just chosen the first one in this case. All right, that's it. So let me just go over quickly, because I've covered this in the user's guide, about how to create SQLite databases. If you want to create them for testing or for actual use, there are tools built into Alpha Anywhere, the companion product to Alpha Transform, that you can get free of charge at alphasoftware.com. And it has built into it the ability, if you look in its tools menu, under more, the ability to create a SQLite database. Now you can find information on how that works step by step in the user's guide. I'm just going to go ahead and paste that into the chat window. I may have been beaten already by Sarah. Yeah, she's also posted that in the chat window. Take a look at page 162 in particular if you're interested in creating SQLite databases. Another handy tool that I've come across, and I think there's a bunch of these, but is a client. This one happens to run on Mac, but they're ones for PC. This actually is for all types, not just Mac. But basically, it's very much like SQL Server Studio or SQL Express Studio, in that it lets you look through your tables, it lets you create new tables, lets you create new databases, lets you modify data, lets you modify fields. So this is a handy little utility. It is basically open source or donationware. You can get it here at SQLitestudio.pl, and I recommend using it. So that is it for me for today. If you have further questions, go ahead and send them to tfservice@alphasoftware.com. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you very much, Sarah, for being there, giving us a concise explanation and links to the relevant documentation. Hope you have a great week. Hope to see you next Tuesday. Take care and stay well. Bye-bye.